Hello and welcome to another episode of Clean Talk. I'm your host, Brad Whitchurch. We are the podcast all about infection control and infection prevention. It is Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern time, and that means we are coming to you live. And I'm very excited to have as our special guest today, Ibraheem from City Health Tech. Ibraheem, tell us a little bit about City Health Tech and about your hand hygiene product, the Opal. Very interested in your vision for the company and your philosophies. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us on. And I really look forward to helping out the infection control community. Our product, very simply, is a small device that sits next to the faucet to track and encourage hand washing times. We started this company in 2017 around this idea of disease prevention. And I kind of came up with this idea out of two ways. One, I was working on the Chicago Health Atlas, which showed all the different health indicators for the entire city of Chicago. And it became blatantly clear that there were a lot of interesting socioeconomic factors in play. And so my focus and vision is how do we build the cities of the future? And a lot of people think about is it transportation, affordable housing, but I think at a very basic level, it is around health. And so it's shocking to me that we didn't focus on disease prevention, period, right? We spend billions of dollars trying to cure the common cold. If we spent that same amount of money trying to prevent it, I think we can see how that's playing out with the coronavirus now, we'd be in a much better place. And the other interesting statistic was my mom was studying to be a nurse. And she told me about how there's a room full of nurses and a doctor asking to sing the happy birthday song twice to make sure they have clean hands. And she did her nursing practicum and found the average doctor washed for 8 seconds. And so I think I was around 20 at the time. And I was like, this is an interesting place to be in terms of how can we, one, encourage people to wash their hands and actually collect data, because currently it's still recorded with a clipboard and stopwatch. They still hire people to go through hospitals and make sure doctors are washing their hands rather than having some sort of technology tool.
Well, obviously, hand hygiene, a critical component in any infection control processes and procedures. I want to get more into the tech, but I want to take a step back and talk about City Health Tech, because I love the vision of the company and your mission to help improve cross-contamination infections through hand hygiene. Tell us a little bit about the philosophies of the company and why you started City Health Tech.
Yeah, so happy to kind of bring it down into where did my entrepreneurial journey begin and how do we really build these philosophies and values into our company. City Health Tech was actually my fourth startup, so it was not my first go. And every time you start something, you fail in a dramatic way, but you learn something deep and valuable. So I got my start, born and raised here in Oviedo, Central Florida. So I'm a Florida native, and I kind of came up with this interesting background with my family being from the Caribbean. First my family go to college, kind of navigating these interesting ecosystems. So I never really knew what the word entrepreneurship meant, but I was selling candy out of my backpack. I was tutoring other kids. And it was when I was a senior in high school, I was interviewing for college, and my interviewer mentioned her job was kind of like Shark Tank. And that's kind of what kicked it off for me. I was like, oh, Shark Tank's really cool. I'd love to come work for you for free. And that was kind of the first lesson that I learned in entrepreneurship, was always ask. That was really the big thing, was being kind of naive, not realizing there's a process or fear around asking. I straight out just said, hey, I'd love to come work for free. I interviewed, and my last half of my senior year of high school was skipping classes to go to investor meetings and really seeing I had never met anyone who'd be more than 100 grand. So seeing a $500,000 $1 million check being written just absolutely blew my mind when I thought about the value that could add to communities. So that's kind of put my entrepreneurship hat on, ended up getting the Gates Millennium Scholarship, which kind of really gave me that privilege to not have to worry about financing my school. Also really great scholarship, attended Northwestern University. And since then, I've just been building. My first startup was an applicant tracking system for student groups. I worked on trying to reinvent the dishwasher. I started a nonprofit focusing on building robotics teams in the local Chicagoland area. And then I kind of focused on, this whole entire company around City Health Tech, right? That's when I really found my passion, when I kind of sat down and said, well, what do I really want to be doing with the rest of my life? And so the values and philosophy we're bringing around City Health Tech is, one, being community driven. How do we be as helpful as possible? The second piece being really open source and accessible, right? There are a lot of CEOs you can't reach out to me. I'm going to try to help you in the best way I can. And then the third piece, really relying on our product, which you can see in my hand, very, very small, fits in the palm of my hand, is actually becoming around this screen. Not only can we track that hand washing time and also encourage the proper ways to wash your hands, which I'm sure you're not getting into your wrists or into your palms, but also focusing on mass communication. Now with changing standard protocols, we're able to say, make sure to say 6 feet apart, make sure you wear your mask. Are we still wearing masks? So it's a great way to kind of engage with your community. And then also start teaching things like mindfulness, vocab to students. It becomes a very popular communication tool and very powerful in how we actually think about nudges and, behavioral design, right? We contact and able to engage somebody for 20 seconds, 5 times a day, because on average, people are washing their hands. You can learn a lot. You think about Duolingo, right? You can learn a whole language by spending like a few minutes every single day. So that's something that we're really passionate about and really focusing is like health literacy, health communication, and really just being community builders.
Now, is that health education? Is that, help me understand and help our viewers understand, is that transmitted through the device? I know you have a screen on the device. Right. Is the device open up to feedback and advertising information? Explain that.
Yeah, so the way the device works is that you approach the faucet, we trigger the screen, and when you put your hands into the bowl, we trigger another set of animations. So that's how we get the hand washing time. We can do this through Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or cellular, and this gets into our cloud software, which is able to say, okay, how long was this person washing their hands? Were they male versus female? What bathroom was it? What was the zip code? And then we're able to play very tailored content on that screen. So it can be anything from, that, like you said, is like health literacy, right? Like what are the best practices on mental health? What are some interesting statistics to promote that proper engagement? So we kind of have like this interesting learning cycle, right? We'll start with hand washing, you kind of get desensitized to, seeing the same sort of animation or timer, and then we re-engage you by showing new content. And at the end of the screen, we have a QR code. And that's really powerful because then people can take a picture, go to a login screen, maybe get a discount, right? We have a lottery system where you can get maybe $2 off to a Subway, right? If you wash your hands for the full 20 seconds. So it's a great way to gamify, also educate and bring it into the other real world off of our device.
Well, it's a great innovation, and we've talked about people. I know it takes a village to bring a product like this to market. Tell us a little bit about your team, what kind of resources you've needed to develop this product and how far along it is in the development cycle and maturity.
Yeah, so I started this when I was a junior in college, right? And so something I learned from my other startups is that the most powerful thing you can do as a founder is to learn how to lead. Right, that is really the core of being a founder or CEO. And so I got a bunch of my friends from my undergrad. I was like, hey, do you want to come work with me on this? Every single person I met, I would ask them, hey, oh, you're a computer engineer? I have a computer engineering project. How can we make this work for you? And I'm also going to give you professional mentorship and resources. But I think a great way to kind of catalyze this was a year into my project. I was at a conference, and this is when I met my co-founder. His background, I could never afford someone like him. His name's Irwoli Akande. His background's in electronics engineering. He worked for WPG Americas and had worked on over hundreds of hardware applications in the IoT field. So how do you win a person over like that to kind of work on your device, right? So I literally just pitched him saying that 95% of people do not wash their hands properly. 80% of diseases are spread through touch. And so he's like, no way, I wash my hands. He goes to home, washes his hands, and it was 14 seconds. And he's like, if I'm not washing my hands, then who really is? Then I brought him in as an advisor. I drive down to Wicker Park here in Chicago every Sunday for 3 hours. We'd meet, and we slowly grew the team by having people who are mentors, professionals, advisors who could mentor the undergrads and use their 5 to 10 hours to kind of strategically grow the team. We've had people, probably close to 100 students, touch this project. Anyone from political science, psychology, computer engineering, computer science. And I think that's what makes such an equitable and diverse design on our startup generally, and making that process open and accessible to anybody who's willing to do two things, communicate and hold yourself accountable. So that's kind of the composition of our team. Right now, it's me and my co-founder who's now finishing up his MBA over at SMU Cox in Dallas. And we're looking forward to the next stage. In terms of our product development, we are right now getting our first 50 devices out into a school, raising money during the pandemic, also navigating these weird supply chain issues. We would literally design our product and then look to go buy parts like 4 or 5 weeks later and find that they're all sold out or have a 3-year lead time. So we've been redesigning this product over and over and over again, but we finally were able to get our inventory, our supply chain, a new round of funding to kind of get this out into the market. So that's what we're looking at this year, is to just get these out and start growing organically, get these case study data and really actually take this from an academic science perspective. How are we actually increasing rates of attendance? How are we focusing on engagement? And do we get people to wash their hands for 20 seconds?
So if I read between the lines, I think you're saying that you've used a fair amount of free labor and sweat equity, but that doesn't last forever. You mentioned that you've done some capital raising. Can you talk a little bit about that? You mentioned the challenges of raising capital during COVID. For those of us that have been through it, we know that there can be challenges to raising capital with or without COVID. Tell us a little bit about your experiences there and how that's helped to shape the company.
So I'll set the scene for you, right? So we had just finished a 10-week accelerator at Northwestern. We had done the 6 weeks NSF I-Corps program at Booth. This was 2019 fall. We had gotten a little bit of money just from bootstrapping and grants. We were about to deploy our product into our first school, and then the pandemic hit. No schools. And this was like my senior year of college, right? So I'm thinking, well, what do I do? Do I get a job? Do I double down? I'm like, well, I'm selling hand washing during a pandemic. This is so important, and I would dedicate my life to doing this because I know how important this will be. Let's give it a shot. And so from March of 2020 to the end of that year, we were fundraising, good 9 months. We talked to hundreds of investors. And mind you, I'm a Gates Scholar, I've won all these awards. My co-founder is an expert in his field. And we had such a hard time raising money. And I'm a great storyteller. I've been pitching. I know my pitch is pretty great. I have all these different academic resources. And, I think just setting the scene for venture capital generally for anyone who is now looking or thinking about raising money, 93% of funding goes to one sort of type of founder. I think it was in the history of Chicago. This was during, the whole entire movement of Black Lives Matter in 2020. There was an article by Chicago Inno that stated that in the history of the city of Chicago, which mind you is I think it's 29 to 30% Black, they literally had 11 Black founded companies who had raised more than $1 million in the history of the city. That's a pretty daunting statistic as I thought about, okay, well, how do we raise this money during the pandemic, right? Adding on these extra layers. So the one thing that I learned that is it's really about building that relationship. A lot of people approach venture capital or fundraising as I'm going to pitch you for 30 minutes. That's it. We're never going to talk to each other. Hopefully then you're going to give me some investment and things will just move fast. Maybe if you're in the Bay Area, that happens. And actually that was our experience. It was December 15th when we met our first angel investor who invested. And within a week, we had 150 grand in our bank account. He was like, I like it. I like you guys. I think your data room's good. Your finances look good. When it was about being prepared, but there we go. And
so let me interrupt you there real quick, because I wonder if you had the same experience I did. So you're struggling to raise capital, you're going on the road show, getting doors slammed in your face left and right, and then you get one guy that says, you know what, I see it. I see the vision, I see the wisdom, I'm willing to invest. He puts $150,000 in. Did it get a little easier to raise capital after that?
Well, at that point, we were spent, right? It was actually really funny. Well, not funny, but kind of sad. Next week, my co-founder caught COVID. This is before the vaccines. And he became one of those long haulers who had a lot of issues and trying to navigate, grad school and all these things. So what we decided is, well, 150 grand was enough. And I think it's really changed my perspective on capital, right? Is how do you do these things in milestones and procedural so you can eventually raise more money or, kind of understanding what is this whole venture capital ecosystem and what do people look for? So as I kind of digested that data points of these hundreds of investors that I talked to, I wanted to figure out how do we structure our next year to do that? And what we found was we can get a lot of this on purchase orders. I think something important to mention is that even, this is kind of insane, but we were being featured by the Obama Foundation, Fox Chicago. We were all across the press. We were named one of the 25 most promising student startups in the country by the Accelerated Liftoff list, and we still couldn't fundraise. And I was like, there's something deeply systemically wrong here. Or maybe I'm just approaching fundraising wrong, right? So the whole entire next year of 2021 was focused on just getting growth, right? Building out our community, re-engaging those investors. And it was a very interesting moment. So that same mentor, when I was a senior in high school, reached out to me, and they don't invest in hardware, but she's like, I like you. You operate in very interesting circles. I would like you to be a venture fellow. And this was a really big moment for me because Deep Work Capital, for anyone in the Florida or surrounding regions, they invest $500,000 to $2 million seed to Series A. And now I got to put my investor hat on. I had an excuse to kind of go back to those investors and say, well, don't invest in me, but here's this other fund. How do we kind of operate? And that's when I realized these are all relationship-based sorts of things, right? It's really about who you know. You start understanding that, VCs, it's not even their money, it's their LP's money. Right. And I think that was something that I didn't really understand, is that it's like it's your therapist, right? It's like they are essentially getting money from somebody else and they are fiscally responsible for making a return. And it's not them personally investing. They got to figure out what is their expertise and how do we actually get a return for their investor, rather than, oh, I'm a venture capitalist, I'm trying to change the world. Let me give you $1 million to do that because I think this is going to make money, but also we're going to fundamentally change things. It's like, no. There are a bunch of other risks that go along to that. So over the last year, I've just been playing investor. I've talked to a lot of other startups. I've kind of bought my time and really said, okay, while we build out and navigate these weird supply chain issues, let's be as helpful as possible. So I'm privileged to say I've helped with, talking to hundreds of founders, helping them make introductions to other VCs. And something that my comment for venture capitalists in general is that when you have a founder who may not be a good fit for you, we need to do a better job of opening another door instead of slamming that door in someone's face. Right? Like I think venture capitalists and me personally, I don't have that big of an audience, but almost every founder I've talked to, I've been able to make a helpful introduction. And that says a lot about, why aren't other funds doing those sorts of things? Is it time, mindfulness, or just not understanding that that's so important at the early stage? So essentially, that's been my mindset. We're getting our product out. We have some really interesting purchase orders, like massive purchase orders that we can't even fulfill out of manufacturing issues. So while we deal with that, we're focusing on just building that community around us and really just supporting other founders generally.
Well, so I'm full of questions because
Sure.
I know other entrepreneurs are watching, and I want to make sure I have it clear. So you got an initial angel investment of $150,000, and then you said you decided that would be enough. Did I get that right? Because I find it hard to believe that you're able to produce this device, go into manufacturing and inventory, which I know you're still, but for $150,000, what additional financing came after that or will be required to make you a success?
So I'll say the question is on speed, time, and expectations. We could have then taken that $150,000, raised another million, and then have investors who kind of get upset at you because you're not able to hit those high growth metrics. So I think the perfect time to raise venture capital is when you are massively growing and you need the gasoline on the fire, right? Otherwise, especially it's a difficult thing for hardware or deep tech products, is how do you hit those benchmarks? And that's why I think angel investors are a great way to do that. And so for us, we decided to take the alternative. Let's just spend the time, right? If you don't have the money, spend the time. Me and my co-founder are fairly scrappy. We can help people make introductions, those sorts of things. And honestly, these devices are not fairly too complex. Like we'll need to do like UL, those sorts of things, but 3D printing got us fairly far, right? You can do a lot in terms of high-end manufacturing with 3D printing. I think to get this our first initial prototype cost us less than $50,000. And that's pretty scrappy. And I mean, that's the thing about me and my co-founder. We literally probably 10x the value of a dollar versus like a traditional entrepreneur because we think very strategically about how we do that and the other returns on investments that we get from spending our money. So in terms of our next, growth, how do we get this to scale as we go from 50 to 1,000? We're doing it in terms of this traditional engineering validation testing is, okay, we're going to do 50, we're going to do 200, then we're going to go to 1,000. So by the end of this year, we're probably going to require between $200,000 to $500,000 in outside capital. But what we did was figure out what can we do to get our purchase orders. All right, as long as we have customers who love us, we can start racking up those purchase orders and finance debt off of that. And because of our system, just so you know, these cost about $200 per device, as well as a $10 monthly subscription. So that's how we kind of finance this. And that's for the data analytics, 1 to 2 new animations a month. And I think I saw a question. The way this is attached to the faucet is a special adhesive. So think of like a 3M adhesive that's super, super strong, but you need like a crowbar to pry it off. So those are one of the things that we are testing is theft of the device. We do these in schools. So I know that a lot of students will try to badge these, ruin the screens, and that's sort of the things that we're trying to really solve for. And as an engineering company, you'll realize that not only is the product important, but it's also the support around the product. That's something I think a lot of founders don't realize is just the importance of customer support and thinking through what happens when things break.
Well, investors love investing in POs and they love a recurring revenue model. So I think you've got a lot to offer there. What are the next steps? When do you anticipate being able to overcome some of these supply chain and design issues and get the product to market? And where are you seeing interest initially?
So starting with just where the product is today, we'll be getting these out hopefully by the end of March, having our first case study of all the hand washing data, the metrics that we get from a school. And we also have other locations. So it's really interesting because we did a lot of press who would actually reach out to us, right? So we had event centers, we had museums, we had like even as cool as like sports arenas, right? So we think there's going to be a big interest from places that have just a huge frequency of people who are now returning. We think about office buildings. We're looking at co-working spaces because they will also want to keep their employees safe, but they can also showcase their portfolio companies. So we're finding that there are other interesting use cases around that screen that is not just that hand washing engagement, but also, it's almost like an advertisement or a sponsored way to communicate to your employees, right? There's a lot of learnings. We can also think about healthcare systems in which they have, those learning modules on, for example, needle disposal care, right? Like, how do you remind people this is the proper way to dispose things? Your emergency protocols for when, example, a fire alarm is pulled, right? There are interesting things that we can kind of like create in terms of learning modules. So we're thinking that by end of March, we still have enough to kind of get us to June in terms of just piling our devices, get to mass production by looking at fall. And hopefully by the time we get to the next flu season, we're at scale and hitting the ground running. So we're pretty excited. And the other interesting things that we're working on is really thinking about population health data, right? Is like, once we get this hand washing data at scale, let's say if we were doing this at a city, could we actually use other data points to predict outbreaks? What do you do when you're sick? You wash your hands more. Or there might be a statistics for vulnerability. We know this location specifically is not washing their hands more. We do some research, find their air quality is poor. It's a great way to kind of form introductions. I think a great inspiration was Kinsa, the smart thermometer who's doing this with the Newark Health Department on creating, actually very interesting, they were able to predict COVID rates before the testing data actually came out publicly. So that's kind of what we're thinking. And I think I see some questions about, can it be sold to counter providers or installers? So we're focusing on creating a retrofit solution. We don't want to have to deal with drilling holes or creating these interesting, like just smaller barriers to entry. So we have two products, and the next one will be kind of interesting, but essentially we have this, which would be attached next to the faucet. We're also working on a design-in solution. So a screen within the faucet itself, which then we can license that out to sink manufacturers, and then we can move more being into a content health literacy company. And I think I talk about health literacy. I think it's important to understand what that means. Only 12% of Americans are considered health literate. And think about that statistic. I think almost half Americans are suffering from some sort of mental illness. So we think about anxiety or depression. I think a great way to start is let's teach people about their health, right? And I think it's an interesting blend to be able to do that while you're physically protecting yourself. Let's also mentally protect ourselves. So those are the cool things that I think we're going to be getting out of this is improved rates on health literacy, improving rates of attendance, creating population health data to prevent future outbreaks, and then eventually being a way to create mass communication. Once you have that screen and you have this engaged audience, what else can we do? We can showcase local artists. We can support small businesses. We can create coupons. You can create this really interesting growth in community around, hand washing. This I think is kind of novel and interesting.
I love the differentiation that you can deliver content. Ibraheem, we've seen a lot of hand hygiene solutions that really haven't gained standardization. And all of them that I have seen lack this content delivery piece. I think that's a critical differentiator. And it's really an important step in what I see as you've just articulated as the future of healthcare. The technology exists today for us to track these pathogens and to deploy mobile disinfection systems to address them. The technology is there. It has to be brought together. I love your hand hygiene technology innovation. And again, I think the missing piece that I haven't seen from similar technologies is the content delivery. Absolutely crucial. How did you come up with that specific idea as being important to the mission and to the product?
This was, a testament to iterative product design, right? You kind of start with some thesis. Before I had my co-founder, right, it turns out his experience was in IoT electronics engineering, small embedded displays. So he's worked on like the small bevy screens and stuff like that. So it happened to just be one of those things in convergence of talent. But when I started, I actually created a vibrational sensor that was attached to the faucet that would trigger 4 LEDs, right? So very simply, how can we indicate light to get people to wash their hands for 20 seconds? Well, it turns out most people didn't know they were supposed to wash their hands for 20 seconds. And let me be clear, washing for 20 seconds is very critically important. If you wash your hands for 10 seconds, in about 2 hours, it'd be as if you hadn't washed your hands at all. If you wash your hands for under 10 seconds, you're actually spreading disease because your hands are like these weird wet places, especially if you're running your hands underwater. Almost don't do that because you are literally spreading disease by all the water that's splashing around. You're not doing anything to kill the bacteria. So it's really that scrubbing and using that disinfectant for soap for that 20 seconds. So,
and how important from your studies is the heat of the water, right? Because we know you need hot water when you're washing your hands, that hot water can have an effect on pathogens. And yet everywhere I go, I can't find a hot water faucet in the restroom. So, how big a deal is that?
Statistically speaking, it's not. I think there's a BBC article and a few other academic sources I'm happy to provide that share that temperature of water does not have an impact. It really is key on duration. It's making sure you are having proper methodology and washing for the full 20 seconds. So, and to back to your question, how do we get to the screen? It was literally just thinking about, well, if people don't know how to wash their hands for 20 seconds, how else can we teach that to people? And then we thought about, well, people get bored. Even if we had a static animation or some sort of sound, how can we consistently get that data to make sure people are engaged? So the cool thing about our device is that we know if you've washed your hands for 20 seconds. Right. So we can also say this is the type of content that people like. And then we have predictive analytics by creating this user profile by saying this specific second grader in this location who are female really love this sort of animation. Let's continue doing things like that and creating these interesting models. And once people get bored, we can continuously update. So that's kind of how we solve that problem. How do we make sure people watching for 20 seconds? My answer usually is we're going to figure it out because we have the data.
I love it. And you can use like the YouTube analytics, right? And determine exactly what content is motivating people to wash their hands longer. And there's just endless possibilities with the content delivery system. I think that piece of your technology is just genius. And to me, it's the single biggest differentiator between other solutions on the market that have been seeking to solve this same problem, which is a real problem. And we know the statistics that probably the biggest thing you can do to help prevent cross-contamination infections is to have effective hand hygiene. And as you've mentioned, all the stats about how rare that really is in our society. I love the device. Now, I have to ask you before we end the show, and we haven't talked about it much, but I've heard some talk that were you on Shark Tank? Is that right?
No, I wasn't on Shark Tank, but my co-founder was actually, he got an award. He was the Texas Future of Business Hall of Fame Legend Award. And so we got to meet Mark Cuban. I have a picture with him on actually on my, I think it was literally the day after my birthday. It was kind of funny in October.
Happy birthday, 30th. Right.
So right, I was like, happy birthday, let's meet Mark Cuban. And so we did interesting enough, actually, it was funny because once you're a small company and you have press, people actually start to care. So when we moved to Dallas, my co-founder moved there. There was a Dallas, picked up the article about Chicago startup moving to the Texas area, and the Dallas Mavericks reached out to us. They sent us an inbound, which was one of those exciting things. Like, hey, we'd love to kind of work with you on this. And so it was kind of this interesting full circle of starting with Shark Tank and now potentially being able to do this with other event centers, or very just even the thought of working with bigger just investors or community members is a really exciting thing for us. And I also see there's a bunch of questions in the chat. I don't know, do we have time to answer those?
Yeah, please go ahead. I see you're reading them there. Go ahead and answer any of the questions.
Yeah, so I see questions on, can it be sold to the counter provider? So I think we talked about kind of our licensing. In terms of waterproofing, that's the reason why it's taken a little bit longer to manufacture this, is we're using industrial grade products. So very specific things that allow this to last for 3 to 5 years. We're taking a very intentional approach events on the waterproofing, the durability, those sorts of things. The gamification, yeah, that's going to be really exciting in terms of also the data that we're going to collect. We can do things like, this is how long people washed in the men's bathroom versus the women's bathroom, right? There's some social accountability that we can do. And then I see some questions about thoughts on using UV technology against COVID. So UV technology is really interesting, right? I think I'm still kind of thinking about what is the best way to use UV? And we talk about, far UVC, the ability to disinfect a room, to disinfect other products. But my main hesitancy or things I'm looking to see in terms of the future is, one, a lot of these solutions have actually been installed during the pandemic. Did they work? I don't think I've seen a conclusive study that said, yeah, we did this in a specific school and they drastically reduced rates of infections versus every other school looking at it during the pandemic. And because I feel like if that happened, I would have saw that data. So that's something I am thinking of. I do think that there is some interesting points in terms of sanitizing a room versus physical using chemicals. So I do think that's pretty exciting. I think the application of far UVC on that's ability to use on people's skin and those sorts of things will be sort of exciting to kind of see how that plays out. But like I said, hand washing is one piece of the toolkit. Very important piece that it's 80% of infectious diseases that are spread through touch, but there are also other interesting technologies. And that's something that I think we need leaders and clarity on what actually works. Because business owners now are being contacted by tons of people who are like, this is the best way to make sure your customers are safe. No, this is the best way. And my question, what is the best way? People are not highly technical. So I do think there is an opportunity for someone to say, this is actually the framework for how we do this. And unfortunately, we have different organizations that are not politicized and we need to figure out what is actual the science. So I'm excited to see science leaders now taking the microphone. I don't know if you guys are on TikTok, but there are a lot of TikToks of doctors now spreading like their information to fight misinformation. And that's also something I'm really passionate about, is just the misinformation and the ability to have good continuous knowledge and say, well, here are the pros and cons, here's what's actually working, here's what's not working.
Well, one of the challenges, as you probably know, Ibraheem, is that in infection prevention, it's very difficult to identify the best solution because there is no silver bullet and there are so many vectors of cross-contamination infection. So you can have a washable keyboard and a protocol that keeps it clean, but if you're not cleaning the floor or the furniture, then you've got a problem. You know, you can have fantastic hand washing technology, but if the air is full of pathogens, you're not going to eliminate the problem. And so it's very difficult to, even through studies, to identify that single silver bullet because it's really multiple vectors. And part of our vision, and one of the reasons we do this podcast, is because we believe that through community, we can bring folks like you together with other innovative solutions that are addressing other vectors to create a suite of solutions that can be effective. And as I said, the technology exists today thanks to people like you doing what you're doing, that we have the technology available to put together that suite of technology and actually track, treat, and ultimately eliminate infections. And that's our goal. And I appreciate, Ibraheem, what you're doing with City Health Tech to help make that goal a reality. I appreciate you being on Clean Talk today. Thanks for joining us, everybody. And be sure to join us next week at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for another episode of Clean Talk. Be sure to hit that subscribe and like button and visit us at cleantalk.tv to register for our community. I want to thank my special guest, Ibraheem from City Health Tech. The product is Opal. Look for that soon in the March timeframe. And until next time, remember, keep it clean.